This is Elevate's Climate Changemakers, highlighting leaders in equity work and climate action. This season, we're having conversations with creators who are centering climate and environmental justice in their art. Let's dive in and meet today's changemaker.
I'm so excited to welcome today's guests, Damon Williams and Daniel Kisslinger, the co-hosts of AirGo, a weekly podcast and media hub here in Chicago. Welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're happy to be here.
It feels like family,
Yeah.
and there's going to be a lot of smiles and laughs because we genuinely appreciate each other. How are you walking through the world these days? We learned that from you. How are you feeling?
Yeah. I think, I'm feeling grateful, which is, always we try to lean into, but I think this is a season of really starting to feel realized in our work and ambition. So as we were really getting started and as our partnership was forming, and I think a lot of the other work that we're informed by, a lot of it was purely vision, purely passion, purely like what if, and I feel like the ifs are starting to take shape a little bit more, so I'm standing in that. How you feeling, buddy?
Yeah, we've done a lot of planting and tending to, and now we're starting to move toward things being ready to harvest, and that's very exciting. So it's so good to get to hang out with y'all.
Yeah, and this is great, y'all. Look at
In our cafe,
this.
we like that. That's how we like to roll.
Yeah. So I'm glad you talked about planting and harvesting. We're working together on a really exciting program called Help This Garden Grow. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. So Help This Garden Grow is a 6-part audio documentary series about Hazel Johnson and People for Community Recovery. Damon, you want to give a little bit more info from there?
And also Cheryl Johnson, her daughter. So for folks who are unfamiliar,
Listen to the documentary.
But Hazel Johnson has been known as the mother of the modern environmental justice movement, worked here in Chicago in Altgeld Gardens community in a highly contaminated industrial zone that is known as the Toxic Donut. And so, she started in the late 70s and really caught wind in the 80s and 90s, and her daughter Cheryl, for the last 20 or so years, has really been embodying and continuing this legacy of not just an organization and not just naming a harm, but really activating what environmental justice looks like. So it's been really exciting for me as someone who's got into media work as an artist, but also as a participant in movement and someone committed to justice and liberation. And in learning this story at a deeper level, it feels like the EJ movement has had so many of the concrete material steps that can sometimes get missed in some of the other spaces that are justice oriented. So it's really felt like I've been finding the answer, and that these Black women have been tending to this revolutionary tradition that really our whole society needs to learn from.
Wow, what a beautiful overview. And we are happy to be a part of it. Talk a little bit about the genesis of it, because it came out of season 2 of Climate Changemakers, and you really touched our hearts when you wanted to do it. But how did you decide to do it?
Yeah, so one, as you said, it was born out of the collaboration that the 4 of us have had now for going on 3 years. So we started working on this show of Climate Changemakers, and really for Damon and me, we had begun learning into and finding our way toward environmental justice, but it wasn't either of our entry points into social movements and activism and organizing or media. And so when we were presented with the opportunity to kind of come in as learners, that was really exciting. And so the way that both of us typically learn is we come across a story or a historical moment or a person that we've never heard of before, and then we go, oh, I wonder what the documentary is on this person. Let me go find out more about their life. And so through talking to Olga Bautista from the Southeast Environmental Task Force on Climate Changemakers, started learning more about that region, came across Hazel's name, and I was like, oh, perfect, I'll go find the documentary. And there's little clips or news stories or, there's plenty of press, but really a full telling of the life and legacy of this person and this community's work over the last 50 years or so didn't exist for me to learn. So I came to Dame, and then we came to you, and largely through the efforts and the support that y'all gave, you've made this project happen. So we are still elbow deep in the making of it. It's been an amazing learning opportunity and challenging and wonderful and exciting. And we're really excited for it to, exist in the world so other people can learn this person's story too.
That's so touching. I want to pass it to Anne because when you came to me, I'm like, let's go to Anne. I've got lots of ideas about how we can do it, and she can raise the money. What was it like talking to the funders about this?
Oh, so inspiring and really just so easy because you all put together such a compelling narrative. And honestly, Hazel and Cheryl's lives is such a compelling narrative. So it was incredibly joyful and pretty easy to bring the resources to this. And I'm grateful to you both for both your curiosity and your persistence. And you've both talked a lot about how you came to the environmental movement, which, brings me my heart joy because we need y'all. We need y'all. I'd love to hear more about your backgrounds in social justice and the work that you've done.
Yeah, so, my entry point into being activated in my consciousness was the Ferguson Uprising. And so I'm a part of one of the co-founders of the Let Us Breathe Collective. So our organization emerged in the ecosystem of what we kind of internally call the Movement for Black Lives. Some folks know it as like the Black Lives Matter movement in general, and particularly like the Black liberatory abolitionist tradition is a big part of our collaboration and definitely like my life and work. And so even in talking about the intersection, when we talk about Black liberation, when we talk about structural racism, there was always this, in the margin or in the ear, like, okay, we need to make sure we have environmental folks at the table, or, we want to have better control of our food systems, or, our health outcomes, right? Like so many of the issues, that then lead into communal conflict, that lead into investment into carceral systems and policing. So many of the causes are these environmental factors. So over the years of marching, being in coalitions, having rallies, having meetings, having event spaces, because that's a lot of what Let Us Breathe does, is make space for movement to gather, to join, to coalesce, to see itself. A relationship to land was always coming to the forefront. And so that translation of like land sovereignty, then I think translated to us being more legible of this larger tradition of EJ work.
Yeah, and I think in the times that our lives have overlapped for the last 8 years, that's definitely been kind of shared trajectories. But I think in some ways going back, like my entry point into experiencing what social movements could look like was kind of, if not mainstream, then kind of widespread environmental movement work in the early 2000s. So I remember going to climate marches, and as a kid, I remember like going to summer camps where we would learn about the pollution and the cleanup of the Hudson River in New York, where I grew up. I remember understanding the ways that like the fish and the whales were impacted by what got dumped in the water. There was that was just part of kind of the fabric of my life. I didn't really think of that as like separate from how I, walked through the woods. But I think I didn't connect that necessarily. It took years of getting to the point where I could see how that connected to the answers to the questions that we were asking. And so I think we had the rare opportunity to come to that on our own terms in a way that made sense in our brains, as opposed to like, oh, this is what we're supposed to be thinking or saying about what the solution is. And that really came from our practice on air and off air, but especially on air, of asking people questions and listening and learning through the types of inquiry that through doing this project we learned were what Hazel and Cheryl have done as well. Is, I have a question and I'm not going to stop until I get an answer. And I'm going to learn how to ask that question a lot of different ways depending on who I'm talking to. So it's been cool to kind of see that mirrored actually in the conversations we've had as part of this project.
Well, we know what Help This Garden Grow is because we've been part of your journey, and we're so grateful for that collaboration. I'd love for you to tell the audience what it is, but I also want to preface it by saying I was excited because this isn't just a podcast documentary series. It is also a different way. It's the dream way of making public media with a community advisory board, with not being extractive, but being participatory and you've got some big goals.
Yeah.
So tell us like what it is and what you want to do.
Yeah, so I think the umbrella concept to the question you're asking is what we work to create, produce, and develop for our peers is what we're calling movement media. And so in that, like, we have, some of it was kind of like growing up and just like wanting to challenge establishment tropes. But as we've, really, I think, come into form, recognize that there's a lot of how storytelling, journalism, media is formed that actually supports, or if not is passive to systems of harm, right? And so, one of the ways that when just in interviews we would see that is just the way in which subjects of stories are objectified in the storytelling process. And so we want to bring up, one, the subjective position of folks that are more connected to the story than we are. But in this process, in our partnership, that is not just ideological or a political performance, that actually in the resources of how it's produced and who are our partners in creating this, wanting to challenge some of the traditions of how documentary or storytelling works, with some nuance, but a lot of times the idea of having the objective subject means I also then do not share resources with them. And so we've created what we call a creative cabinet of 5 folks who are in the EJ space that have been our thought partners in shaping the macro structures of the story, but then also PCR as an organization and the steward and the bastion of the legacy of Hazel and Cheryl, that the resources that we receive is also being split and shared in a cooperative model with the folks that we're telling the story with. So it's not the power dynamic of we're coming and you stay there and be studied and be looked at as like an anthropological experiment. We are telling the story together because it's your legacy. And so that's been the way in which all of our investment and the way in which we also see ourselves and our relationship to the work has been shaped.
This is actually also a really good reminder that I have to email our creative cabinet. But I think that was a central point for us coming in, especially since this project, we've been talking into microphones and interviewing people for many, many years now. But this was a first foray into this form of doing a multi-part documentary. And we both have seen, like Damon said, the harms in how the structures of that medium work, right? People always talk about, or often talk about objectivity, and there are kind of these principles of journalism. And we understand where they come from, we understand how they can be valuable, but the prioritizing, maintaining a distance from your subjects, and maintaining the resources away from your subjects over the human connection and the contribution to movement. Like, we're not doing this to, quote, build awareness, though of course we want more people to know about the work. We're trying to, in as many ways as we can, contribute to the liberatory, world-changing work of PCR and the environmental justice movement. And we are unabashed and unapologetic in that being the goal of the work we're doing. And so I think that then informs how we interact with our cabinet, how we interact with our partners, how we interact with y'all, how we interact with the people who we're interviewing, is we are trying to offer this as a gift because we see the importance of the work in some ways that people might not even be able to see themselves.
Yeah, and so I'll jump in there a little
also,
bit.
we talk forever, so cut us
But
off.
I just want to name, because he brought up this importance of contribution, right? So a lot of times storytelling can be for education, which we value, or entertainment, which can be very passive. And we want to, in our work, activate people. So one, where you are, the work and the model that Hazel embodies is something that we want people to do everywhere. But also, her name has become more popular in recent years, but there hasn't been a matching and investment in resources in maintaining her legacy. So you'll start to see it more mentioned in newspapers or some of these valuable but symbolic gestures. But while she was alive, and for the last 25 years, there has been this push to have a Hazel Johnson environmental center. And so even if from it, in our dream ego, we do this media project, it becomes super successful, then everybody contributes with their little $10. But even if that's not the case, just knowing that it is a harm, or it is inappropriate for us to be going forward with this movement without there being an actual investment in the spaces that made the movement possible.
I love all of the things that you all are doing, and I'll tick off that I know you want to have a bit of a study guide. You're even lifting the fact that the center is desired by the community, and the clips that we've heard are absolutely phenomenal. So we can't wait to see it come to life.
Can't wait to hear it either. So it's going to be 6 parts. It'll be released at some point early next year, is the plan. You'll hear some little teasers and things like that before that, but it'll be, probably a 6-episode, kind of full-length, feature-length for each episode, and the contributions of the voices of, like, I don't know, dozens and dozens of people who we've had a chance to talk to.
About 30 people or so.
Yeah.
You've been really embedded in the community. It's so exciting.
Yeah, and you guys are so inspirational. The quality of your work, the intersectionality of the work is just truly inspirational to me. Can you tell me what inspires you?
Ooh.
Receiving compliments. That's a great question.
You know, I have a go-to answer, which also connects to why I've been so grateful of this deeper entry into EJ work. My like biggest movement contributors to my thinking, and I think so much work, is the Boggs from Detroit. So James and Grace Lee Boggs, who start from this, not start, but are grounded in this overtly revolutionary tradition, labor organizing, you know, the big theory coming out of like CLR James' socialist camp. And then by the 80s and 90s, there's this recognition of we have to do the work, we have to prefigure what we're naming. And so with the legacy of like Detroit Summer, there was this practice of urban agriculture, urban farming, seeing that what's happening in the crumbling, deindustrialized communities of our cities is, one, an environmental dynamic, and 2, directly impacting the interpersonal social dynamics that are being criticized from these like conservative neoliberal standpoints. And so, you know, and they intersect with art and performance, and then also just particularly with Grace, and she'll live to like be about 100, what it looks like to put a lifetime into this work, right? So often we think of things as an event, right, or a moment. And what does it look like to dedicate decades or 80 years to these traditions and where they can go? So I'm gonna shout out the Boggs, and you can maybe go more contemporary if you want.
She knew who you meant, though.
Yes. Shout out Grace Lee and Jimmy. You know,
And the documentaries have already been made for them. Go watch those. But yeah, let's see, what inspires? I mean, so that's kind of in the themes or the ways of thinking, but in terms of the form of what we do, I've just always loved the intimacy of having someone's voice in my ears. Like, that's what drew me to audio in the first place, was the ability to like break through, I don't know, the performance of being, whether it's on camera or even in person, the way people are. I know it's funny to say, but we've heard this spill from me before. But
I have.
I've just always loved that. I think, you know, there's something that happens when you've been talking to someone and the mics kind of fade away a little bit in your mind, and all of a sudden they're saying the thing that they wouldn't have said before because they trust you. And as a listener, you've been with them for that amount of time, and you're able to hear it in a way that you wouldn't have if they'd started with that. There's an intimacy there that like is what I strive for in other parts of my life too, in my relationships, that I feel like there's a way to build within media and model. And so that's what inspires me, is people who've been able to do that really well as interviewers.
He's definitely a public radio, you know, loving guy.
So it's complicated.
Well, you're an audio guy.
You're the public radio person in my life.
Well, yeah.
For better or worse.
You're in the 99th percentile of radio.
Well, okay, here's what I'll tease you guys with, and Anna will appreciate this. Studs Terkel and Oscar Brown Jr. of the future and of the moment.
But, I know, Studs is my guy.
Yeah.
So seriously, I could see it. So look it up if you don't know any of those voices or people.
We're giving people homework today.
We are giving them homework. We are.
Speaking of
Activate
which,
you.
where can people learn more about your work?
So in addition to this project, we alluded to it, but kind of the flagship of what we do is a show called AirGo, which is pretty much weekly podcast that we've been doing since 2015, interviewing artistic workers and movement workers, mostly based here in Chicago. And so that's AIRGO, wherever you get your podcasts, ergoradio.com, all that type of stuff, at Ergo Radio on socials. And then, of course, the Climate Changemakers work that we did for the last couple of years is a kind of a great entry point I was just talking to somebody who was talking about how that for them was an entry point into environmental justice work, as that show. So great job.
You did it.
But yeah, AirGoRadio.com, AIRGO, wherever you get your good old podcasts.
Well, we'll link to you, but we're excited because we're seeing the evolution of great thinkers who, there's a saying that you plant water or you pour water and it might dry up, but someone else comes along and pours some more. I feel that whatever we did together is just the start of what you all are going to offer to the world. And to think that it began, at least this part, with a relationship with Elevate is really humbling, and we're grateful because that intergenerational work is what we need, because climate change is coming for all of us.
Yes.
So it takes all of us.
And I can't overstate, but I'm gonna try.
Do it.
Like how much this doesn't exist without y'all. Like, one, it's wonderful to get a chance to reflect, and I get you're being interviewed and all that, but like this is really a true partnership, this project, in terms of, bringing the resources is one piece, but there has been such incredible
Support
and learning for the two of us who, like we said, this is a new arena, and just it's very rare to find the type of mentorship that we found from both of y'all in terms of how to get to make things on your own terms, how to do things ethically, how to do things in a way that's in line with our politic. Like, there's plenty of people who know how to write a grant, though not as well as you. But there's been a type of care and
alignment.
And
Hey, don't start making us cry and everything.
That was our goal.
Push in. That's the other. Push in for a close-up.
No, but thank
We're trying to
you
give you some content here.
really so much for the ways that you've made this project possible and our own growth possible. And it's been so incredibly impactful.
It's a
All
work
we
that
want
is-
you to do is fix everything. So that's the only payback.
Can I just mentor
Yeah.
someone?
Okay, you can do
Fair
that
enough.
too.
Okay,
You can do that
Excellent. I'll
too.
finish the show and then we'll tell people about it.
Thank you so much for being with us. This is a fun episode of Climate Changemakers, the intimate conversation with people who care and who are working together to bring something unique into the world that will bring all of us forward as we battle the climate crisis. I'm Sylvia Ewing, Daniel, Damon.
And
Love it.